Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Gimel at Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara until now gave us various Averos and their consequences. Now our Gemara expands on this, bringing the following Brisa Tanu Rabbanon Dalid Simonin Hein. There are 4 different indicators. Simin la'avera hidroikon. The indication for the Avera of Znus is hidroikon, a choili, a sickness of the swelling of the belly. Simin lesinas chinom, an indicator of sinas chinom, of hatred towards your fellow Jew. Yirakoin is a form of jaundice. Simin legasus haruach anius, the indicator of gaiva, of arrogance, is anius. Here it doesn't refer to material poverty, but rather somebody who has anius in Torah. Because a person who has arrogance, he won't listen and learn from others. And he'll also rely on his own knowledge, thinking that he knows best, and therefore he doesn't also have to review his learning. And therefore he'll be impoverished when it comes to Torah. Simin lelashon hara askara. The indicator of somebody who speaks lashon hara is the punishment of askara, which begins in the intestinal tract and completes itself in the throat. Says the Gemara now to expand on askara, ton rabbanon, askara, ba la'olam al hamaiser. According to the Tana over here, askara, this punishment that begins in the intestines and completes itself in the mouth and the throat, is due to the fact that a person did not take meiser. That means that the grains, instead of taking the chumas and meisers, which are obligatory, he eats the grains without doing so, which is tevel. Tevel is chayiv misa bidei shomayim, and therefore that which he swallowed with his throat and then ingested in his intestines will be a punishment mida keneged mida, with the punishment of askara. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi Omer al lashon hara. It's a result of lashon hara. Omar Rav Avitem Rabbi Shua ben Levi Ma'ikra. What's the verse that supports this? V'hamelech yismach be'elokim. And the king David HaMelech says about himself, he will rejoice in Hashem. Yishalel kol hanishba boy ki yisacher pi doivrei shoker. He will become praise. He will praise all of those that swear within him, that they will, those mouths that will speak sheker, false, referring to lashon hara, will be stopped. The word ki yisacher will be stopped. The Gemara makes a drasha. Yisacher is a lashon of askara, of the disease that we're referring to, which begins in the intestines and completes in the mouth. Iboy lohu. The Gemara asks, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi, who just said that the punishment of askara is a result from a lashon hara. What was his kavana? Al lashon hara kamar, or dilma af al lashon hara nami kamar? Did he mean to say only as a result of the speaking of lashon hara, of slandering other people? That's what results in askara, or is it because of other things that include also lashon hara? Toshma, the Gemara brings the following brisa. When the sages entered the Beis HaMedrash of Keren B'Yavna, Hayasham, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Shimon. There are 3 sages, Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi, and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Nishala she'ela zu bifneim. The following question was asked before them. Makazu mipnei ma mascheles bivnei mayayim v'gomeres bapeh. This mak of askara, why does it begin in the intestinal tract and complete itself in the mouth? Says the Gemara, Ne'enes, this is the Brisa continuing, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eloi, Rosh HaMedabrim b'kol mokom v'omar. Rabbi Yehuda ben Eloi began and explained the following reason. Afal pisha kiloyos yoatzois, even though it is the kidneys that give counsel, v'leiv mevin, and the heart understands and decides whether it's going to use that counsel or not. V'loshen mechatech, and the tongue enunciates. Peg goimer. However, it's the mouth ultimately that completes itself, and therefore referring to then the speaking of lashon hara. Nene Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosi, and he was the same one who said above lashon hara is going to then result in askara. And he says over here, Va'omar mipnei she'oichlim ba'dvarim tmeim, because of eating dvarim tmeim. Ask the Gemara, dvarim tmeim salke daitoch, is that going to be a punishment for askara, for being chayiv misa? That we don't find. We find that by lashon hara. There's psukim that say that, but by eating dvarim tmeim, not. Elas the Gemara, his kavan is she'oichlim ba'dvarim she'eina mesukanim. Rather, it means eating things that have not been taken meiser or truma from. And therefore, we see already the proof that the Gemara is bringing, that indeed, he that said, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi above, that asker comes as a result of lashon hara, here he says it's because of not taking out trumas and meisers. So we begin seeing over here the proof then, that indeed, asker results even for lashon hara, not just for lashon hara. But the Brisa continues, na Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he answers the following explanation. Va'omar ba'avoin bitul Torah. As it says that Torah is orech yomim, it's the length of a person's days. And therefore, if a person is mevatel Talmud Torah, that then will result in the death of askara, which also again is a result of not using one's mouth in the right way. Instead, he's mevatil Talmud Torah instead of using the mouth for Torah. Amru loi, they said to him, to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who says Bittul Torah is the result of askara, nashim yochichu. Women will actually prove differently than what you're saying, because women are not obligated in Talmud Torah, and yet they also result in the choyli of askara. They also often have askara. Answers Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, shemevatlois as baalein, they are mevatil their own husbands who are obligated in Talmud Torah. That's also a form of bittul Torah then. Ask the Gemara, but Nochrim yochichu, Nochrim, non-Jews, they don't have the obligation of limud haTorah, and yet we find asker by them as well. Answers the Gemara, shemevatin es Yisrael, the mevatil Klal Yisrael from learning Torah. Tinoikos yochichu. Ask the Gemara, or the Brisa rather, on Rabbi Shimon, Tinoikos, who are not obligated in limud haTorah, they will prove that not like what you're saying, because they also sometimes get askara. Answers Rabbi Shimon, shemevatlin es avihen, they're mevatil their own fathers from limud haTorah. Ask the Brisa, Tinoikos shel beis Rabbon yochichu, the children who are in the beis Rabbon, in the cheder, they will prove against what you're saying, because they're also not b'nei limud, and they also get askara. Hasam kid Rabbi Gurion, the Amar Rabbi Gurion, v'item Rav Yosef, Rabbi Shmaya. Bizman shehad tzadikim bedor, tzadikim nisposim alador. When there are tzadikim in the generation, then the tzadikim are mechaper on the generation. Ein tzadikim bedor, tinoikes shel beis Rabbon nispasim alador. Then the tinoikes shel beis Rabbon, they will be then bringing a kapara for the door. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Zeiri v'amar Ilam Rabbi Shimon ben Gezerah Mikro. What's the verse that supports this? Says the Gemara, the following pasuk from Shir Hashirim: Im lo teidi loch hayafe b'noshim. If you will not know, meaning how to perform the mitzvahs properly, those beautiful ones amongst the women, referring to Klal Yisrael, tzi loch be'ikvei hatzoin, then go to the ikvei hatzoin, which is a reference to the zechus of the avos. Ask rachamim from Hashem in the zechus of your forefathers. And the rest of the pasuk goes on to say, Uri'iyas gidosayich al mishkenois haroim, and graze your gidim, your children, al the mishkenois haroim, on the places of the roim, of the shepherds. The Gemara makes a drasha. Who's this reference to? This is the Gidim, your children. Says the Gemara, V'amrinan Gidim hamushkanim al haroim. It takes the word mishkanois and it makes a drasha of mashkoin, collateral. The Gidim will be a collateral on the roim, on the shepherds, on the Gedolei Hador, the Manhige Hador in Klal Yisrael. Shma Mina, the Gemara then concludes its proof from this brisa, Af al loshen har nami ka'omar Shma Mina. Indeed, that the punishment of askara results even for loshen har, but not limited to loshen hara. Ask the Gemara, Va'amai kori le Rabbi Rosh HaMidabrim b'kol mokom. That was referred to before in the beginning of the brisa that we just quoted, that Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai is called the Rosh HaMidabrim. Why was he given that status that he's the first person to open up and speak before everybody else in a public matter? The Gemara now brings the following: the Yosfi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon. The following Maisa, where the three sages, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eloi, Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Shimon were sitting together. The Yosef Yehuda ben Gerim Gabayhu, and Yehuda ben Gerim, the son of Gerim, his mother was a Giyares, his father was a Ger, was sitting alongside them. Posak Rabbi Yehuda va'omar, kamanoim maiseim shel umazu, referring to the Romans. How pleasant are the actions, are the deeds of the Romans. Tiknu shivakim, they instituted all types of marketplaces. Tiknu geshorim, they also instituted all types of geshorim. Tiknu merchatzois, also bathhouses. So he praised the Romans, knowing that he was endangered, and therefore he praised them. Rabbi Yossi shosak, Rabbi Yossi didn't say anything. Nene Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai va'omar. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai answered and he spoke up and he said the following: Kol mei shetiknu lo tiknu ella litzorich atz. Kol ma shetiknu lo tiknu ella litzorich atzmon. All that they enacted, all the deeds that they did were only for themselves. Tiknu shvakim lo hoishi behen zoynos. They made marketplaces in order to then have harlots. Marchatzois la'adein behen atzmon. Bathhouses to then make their skin better. More smooth. Gisharim litol mehen meches. And they also made bridges to then cause taxations, to gain more money that way. Now it doesn't mean that Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, who praised the Romans, didn't agree with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, because we have a Gemara somewhere else in the beginning of Avodah Zarah that speaks about that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say the very same thing that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is saying against the Romans and the other nations, that they're doing all of these things not for Klal Yisrael, but for themselves. Only Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai did not want to speak up against the Romans because of the danger that presented itself, as the Gemara will show soon. Holach Yehuda ben Gerim v'siper divreihem. Yehuda rather, ben Gerim went and he spoke about what he heard, namely what Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said, to others, to his father and to his mother perhaps, maybe to his own students. V'nishmu l'malchus. He didn't say it to the malchus, chas v'sholom, to the Romans, but it was ultimately then heard by the malchus subsequently. Omru, they said, the Romans said, Yehuda she'ilo yis'ale. Rabbi Yehuda ben Eloi, who spoke and elevated the Romans, then he shall be elevated. Therefore they made him, amongst other things, the Rosh HaMidabrim, to give him kavod. Yossi sheshosak yigla litzipari. Rabbi Yossi, who was quiet, then they exiled him to the city of Tzipari. Shimon shegina yehareg. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, they said, is going to be killed. Ozal hu ubrei toshu beit midrasha. The Brisa continues and explains what took place, that indeed Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai took his son and they hid in the Beis HaMedrash from the Romans. Kol yama hava ma'isi luhu devisu rifta v'kuzo demaya v'karchi. Every single day his wife would bring he and his son, a pitcher of water and some bread, and they would eat. Ki tokif gezeirosa, when the intensity of the gezerah became even stronger, Omar le lebrei, Rabbi Shimon said to his son Rabbi Elazar, Noshim daitan kala alehen. Women are susceptible. They can then be swayed very easily. Dilma mitzare lo umegali alon. Maybe they will then find my wife, your mother, and they will mitzar her, and they'll cause it to reveal where we are. Ozlu toshu b'ma'arava. They went and they hid subsequently in the cave, where even his own wife would not know his whereabouts. Israchish nisa ibriluhu charva ve'ina demaya. It says over here that a nace took place, and not just any nace, but a nace of a carob tree and a water spring developed right by where the cave was. In other words, a carob tree is unique in that the fruits, the carobs themselves, take 70 years, Chazal say, to grow. And so over here, it instantaneously produced fruit. Says the Gemara, V'havu mashalchi menaihu, v'havu yasbe ad savaroi bechala. Daily they would take off their clothing and they would bury themselves into the sand up until their necks. What would they do? All day, kuli yoima garse. All day they would be busy learning Torah together. Be'idan saluye, lovshu mikasu umetzalu. When it was time for prayer, they would then get clothed. They would clothe themselves and cover themselves up and daven. Not because they had to cover themselves up from their erva, because they were already buried in sand, but because hikon likros Hashem Elokecha, they went to then greet HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Melech. They wanted to have begadim on, clothing before the king when they speak to him in prayer. V'hodar, afterwards, Mishalchi minayo ki heichi de lo livlu. Then they would take off their clothes once again so that they wouldn't become worn out. The Gemara goes on to explain, Isbu treisar shani b'ma'arasa. They sat in the cave for 12 years. Osa Eliyahu v'kama pischa de ma'arasa. Eliyahu Navi came to the mouth of the cave. Omar, and he declared, Man ludei lebar yoichoi, the mis kesar uboto gzeirose. Who will then reveal and inform Bar Yochai, referring to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that the Caesar died and the Gzeira, the decree, is now nullified. Nafku, he and his son Rabbi Elazar went out of the cave. Chazu inchi de kakaravi vizari, and they saw people that were plowing their fields and they were planting their fields. Omar, he said, Manichin chayin oilam v'oisim b'chayi shah. He said, are people going to then leave the Chaye Olam, referring to Olam Haba, spirituality, and they're going to be involved in materialism of this world? This is an echo, a parallel of what the Gemara says in Brachos Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis, where Rishon Bar Yochai says, if a person's busy with planting and plowing and harvesting and all the other things that are necessary in the field, then where is he going to have time for learning Torah? Says the Gemara, Kol makam shenoisten einehem miyad nisraf. He says any place that they put their eyes on, immediately with that midas hadin, that strict judgment, they would peer at that person or that thing, and it would cause fire to erupt and burn that thing that they're looking at. Yatis Abasko v'amr lehem lahachriv olami yitzasem. Abasko went out and said, did you come out of the cave to then destroy my world? Chizu l'maraschem, go back and return to the cave. Says the Gemara, Hadu va'azul isivu treisar yarchi shosa. They returned to the cave and they sat there for another 12 months, another entire year. Amru, they said, Mishpat Rishoim Gehinnom Yud Beis Chodesh. They said the Mishpat of Gehinnom is 12 months, and therefore we received our kapara by being here in the cave for another 12 months. In fact, Yatzis a Baskol v'Amra, a Baskol went out and stated the following: Tzu'u mimaraschem, go out from your cave. Nafku, they went out. Kol heicha dahava mochi Rabbi Elazar, have a mosi Rabbi Shimon. Whatever Rabbi Elazar looked at and then destroyed, Rabbi Shimon then healed and he repaired it. Omar Loi, Rabbi Shimon said to his son, Rabbi Elazar, Beni, Dai la'olam ani va'ato. It's enough that the world has you and I who are oisik in Torah. In other words, the two of us, with our learning Torah, that's sufficient, and we can't expect others to have the same degree of spirituality of limud haTorah like we do. Bahadi panya demali shabto, on that Erev Shabbos, chazu hahu sabed ahavonokit shrei, madoni asa, veroi ben hashmoshos. They saw an elderly person who was running on ben hashmoshos Erev Shabbos with two hadassim, myrtles in his hand. Omrule, they said to him, Hani lamaloch, what do you have these myrtles in your hand for? Omarlu, he said to them, Lichvoid Shabbos, in honor of the Shabbos. V'tiski loch bechad, wouldn't it be enough for you to have just one hadas? Why do you need two hadassim? Chad, he said, keneged zochar, v'chad keneged shamor. One corresponds to Zochar is Yom HaShabbos Lekadishoy, the positive aspects of Shabbos, while the other one refers to Shamor as Yom HaShabbos Lekadishoy, referring to the Isurim, the sanctity of not doing Malacha on Shabbos, which is actually also the source of the minhag why we light two candles on Shabbos, one for Keneged Shamor, one Keneged Zochar. Omalei livrei chazi kama chavivi mitzvahs al Yisrael. Rabbi Shimon says to his son, look how cherished the mitzvahs of Klal Yisrael are upon Klal Yisrael. Yosiv daitayu, finally this appeased the two of them, and they had yeshiva das once again. Shama Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair chasnei v'nofik la'apei. It says that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, it says over here chasnei, his son-in-law, but others are gores, that the true girsa here is Chosnei, it's his father-in-law. The father-in-law of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went out to greet him. Aile lebei b'nei, he brought him to the bathhouse. Havaka orich le levisrei, he began massaging Rabbi Shimon's skin. Chazi da havabei pili begufe, he saw that he had cracks inside of on his skin, on his flesh. The tears that resulted from his crying for his son-in-law. Rabbi Shimon, who was in pain all of those years in the cave, caused those tears to then fall into these cracks on his skin, causing Rabbi Shimon to cry out in pain because of the salt that disturbed his wounds. Omalei, oili sherasicha bekach. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says to his son-in-law, woe is to me that I see you in such a state. Omar le ashrecho shereisani bekach. Fortunate are you who see me in this way. Sheilmole l'raisani bekach lo matzasi bekach. Because if it wasn't for the fact that you didn't see me in this way, then also I wouldn't be in this way either. I wouldn't find myself in this way either. To explain, he says the following: Demikara ki have makshi Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai kasha have mefarich le Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair tresa piruki. When I would ask a question, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is saying, then you, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, would answer with 12 different answers. Lesoif ki have makshi Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair kusha have mefarich le Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai esrim ba'arba piruki. But now that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair will ask a question, so I, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, will then be able to answer in 24 terutzim. That's how much Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gained in his spirituality over those years when he studied Torah in the cave with his son for 12 years plus another year, engrossing and being misamil in the Torah HaKedosha.